The session was already 2 hours old when Auditor Primus Kethvaron called my name for the third time, and I still hadn't moved. I was sitting at the far end of the compliance table, the human end, as they'd taken to calling it in the 3 years since the development ceiling court had passed, with a bound document in front of me in my hands, flat on the table. Varan was an Orthari, all cartilage and ceremony, and he had a way of folding his secondary arms behind his back when he was certain of something. They were folded now. Assessor Calloway, he said again. The board has completed its preliminary review. Earth's compliance filing has been accepted as submitted. You may confirm and we proceed to adjournment. I looked at the document in front of me, then I looked at him. Run your audit first, I said. The chamber, 42 seats arranged in a shallow crescent. The Oversight Board of the Galactic Regulatory Compact, 7 species, 11 delegations, went very slightly still. Not dramatically. Just the way a room goes still when someone says a thing that doesn't belong in the fact. Varan's secondary arms unfolded a centimeter. The preliminary review. Is preliminary, I said. Run the full audit. You have our production records. Cross-reference them against the Accord's ceiling schedule, Section 4, Annexes B through F, all of them. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at his colleagues. Delegate Surath of the Vakani leaned forward slightly. Delegate Osai of the Tethron Combined said nothing, but I watched her eyes move to the data panel at her station. This is irregular, Varan said. It's in the Accord, I said. Article 19. Any signatory may request a full cross-referenced audit at any compliance session. Questing one. He unfolded his arms entirely. That was how I knew he was no longer certain. The audit ran for 40 minutes. I sat and waited. I'd had 3 years to wait. Another 40 minutes was nothing. The Orthari computational systems were fast. That was the thing about the board. They were thorough, they were precise, and they believed very deeply in the integrity of their own numbers. It was, in many ways, their finest quality. It was also why this was going to go the way it was going to go. At the 20-minute mark, Delegate Osai called a procedural pause and stepped away from her station. I watched her speak quietly to 2 of her staff. One of them pulled up a secondary display and began working through something. I kept my hands on the table. At 31 minutes, Surath said, "Is a discrepancy." He said it the way you say something when you're opsumpung someone will tell you it isn't true. In which sector? Varan asked. All of them. The room went quiet again. This time it stayed quiet. I'd been a trade compliance assessor for the compact for 9 years before the Accord passed. I knew what Section 4, Annexes B through F, actually measured. The board knew it too. Technically, they'd written the Accord. What they hadn't understood, when they wrote it, was the difference between a ceiling on declared output and a ceiling on output. The Accord capped what Earth had declared. It capped our registered production facilities, our reported energy expenditure, our documented industrial capacity. It did not, because the board had never thought it needed to, cap the things we hadn't declared yet, the research programs that hadn't filed, the manufacturing systems that existed in classification categories the Accord didn't recognize. The quiet compounding of 40 years of work that had never once appeared in a compliance filing, because nothing in the Accord required it to. We hadn't hidden it. That was the part I wanted them to understand, though I wasn't going to say it. We hadn't smuggled anything. We hadn't filed false records. Every figure in our compliance submissions was accurate. We had simply, carefully, continued building everything the Accord didn't mention. The figures show. Surath stopped. Started again. The figures show that Earth's declared capacity across all sectors represents approximately 31% of Earth's actual production output. Varan said, "Run it again." I watched the second audit run. I watched the third. I kept my hands flat on the table and my face very still, because I was not there to gloat. I was there to let the numbers do what numbers do. At the 4th reading, Delegate Osai said quietly, "Isn't a computational error." "Then what is it?" Varan asked. She looked at the display for a long time. "It's an annex gap," she said. "The Accord doesn't cover production capacity in categories that didn't exist at the time of signing." "What categories?" 17 of them, she said, that we've identified so far. The chamber was very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Delegate Maharis of the Celathi Combine who had seconded the original accord motion, who had called it the finest regulatory achievement of the current session, had not spoken in 11 minutes. I could see him in my peripheral vision, very still, reading something on his private display. Varan turned to me. His secondary arms were perfectly, completely still. "Assessor Calloway," he said, "how long?" "Has the gap existed?" I said. "Since before the accord was signed." The room processed that. "You signed the accord," he said. "We did, and we complied with it, fully. Every figure we filed was accurate." I kept my voice level. "The accord asked us to cap our declared output. We capped our declared output. We never agreed to stop working." Surath said something in Vikani that the translation system rendered as a question about foundational assumptions. It wasn't really a question. "The gap," Osai said. And she sounded like someone reading an unfamiliar number aloud to see if it becomes more real. "Presents, at current trajectory, approximately 40 years of compounded development, across 17 unregulated categories." 43, I said. "We had a head start." No one spoke. I reached forward and slid the bound document to the center of the table. It landed with a soft sound that carried in the silence. "That's our filing for the current cycle," I said. "Declared capacity only, as required. Annexes B through F, fully compliant." I stood up, I straightened my jacket. Varn was looking at the document. Osai was looking at her display. Maharis still hadn't moved. "We'll see you at the next session," I said. I walked to the chamber door. Behind me, heard Surath say something to Varan in a low voice. I heard Varan respond. I didn't hear what either of them said, and I didn't need to. I'd been in enough rooms like that one to know what the conversation was. It was the conversation you have when you realize that the ceiling you built was the only thing that ever had a limit. I stepped through the door and into the corridor, and the door closed behind me, with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. 3 years since the accord. 43 years before that. All of it in the space they'd never thought to measure. We hadn't broken a single rule. We had simply never agreed that their rules were the boundary of what was possible. That, I think, is the thing they will spend the longest time learning to understand.